in the United States, there were more people in the governmental structure then than there are right now in 2025. How does that happen? Because systems are in place to ensure that you don't rise. So he's doing his work to say, really, where do you stand? Because it's really a striving of, do you want to just go be an American or the national consciousness of whatever country you're from, or do you deal with your identity? And so in my position, you deal with your identity, become better off mentally, because the system can go backwards and target you. And that's what's happening in the United States right now, where people who could be immigrants coming from other countries, and they could have their correct passports, they could have their correct visas, but you don't look the same. So the national consciousness of that government is trying to get rid of people who don't look like them.
We are here in Santo Domingo, the Dominican Republic, and TiMo is visiting us because he's on his way going to Martinique to assist or attend the conference Frantz Fanon, his 100th birthday, and we're really excited about that, and we're so glad and happy that we have TiMo here with us. We've been going around some of the places here, and TiMo, are you having a good time here?
Yes, I'm enjoying my experience. I've seen a whole lot. I thank you for that opportunity.
Okay, thank you. So we're here in a very special place. We have many special places, but this place is, it's called El Parque Mirador del Sur. And so we kind of like wanted to give something different to our usual presentation now that TiMo is here. And so we hope you enjoy the view the same way that we are enjoying it. And so we're going to be talking about an article that TiMo wrote, and it had to do also with Frantz Fanon. And it's called A Fanonian Perspective. Am I pronouncing that correctly?
Yes.
Okay. On double consciousness. When I heard that, double consciousness, I said, what is this? And so it's very interesting. Is it already out, or it's going to come out?
Get out. That's 20 years ago.
Oh my goodness. So 20 years ago. So tell us a little bit about it.
I shall. So I am here in Santo Domingo visiting. We're going to make our trek to Martinique. So the conference in Martinique is the 100th anniversary of his birth. Black psychiatrist named Frantz Fanon. Without his work, a lot of movements may not have been as progressive. He is from Martinique, but he made his inroads in a place called Algeria, where he helped out with the Algerian Revolution. So he was trained by the French. I mean, he was a military person in the army, got hurt. As he's in the army, he's saying the Arab doesn't like the black doesn't like the Jew, Jews don't like the white. It's like all this hate. What's going on with this identity? So as a scholar, Frantz Fanon experienced the disconnect between people with their identities. And so he chose to go to psychiatry for his discipline, and from his work, he was able to influence many people with their movement. So I'm wearing a Black Panther shirt, and I feel like I'm Black Panther walking in these caves in Santo Domingo. I feel like, if you're dealing with identity, I feel like I'm a Taino in the experience that they lived and what they went through. But Fanon, in his work dealing with identity, being from Martinique, they were colonized by the French. So what does it mean to be Martinician? Or are you Black? Or what's your African heritage? So in that whole movement in France, there's something called negritude. So you had Leopold Senghor, you had Aimé Césaire. They were people that were very involved in the movement. And they helped to create a certain level of consciousness for the Black people there to know about their heritage rather than just being French. Because if you think about it, like right now in the United States, you have a government that is targeting people to remove migrants or immigrants or people who don't look white from that environment. That means the people who are those colored people living there, does that mean they don't identify with America anymore? So this whole issue of identity impacts many cultures. And you have that experience here in the Dominican Republic where there's the mixture of people, but what is the identity? You can have a national consciousness, you can have an individual consciousness, so your national consciousness is probably good, but it's problematic on this one island because you have an island that's been split between Haiti and the Dominican Republic side, so what's the identity of the island? So Frantz Fanon did his work to focus on those kinds of tasks. And so beyond Fanon, who was born in 1925, passed in 61, I wrote that article on the Fanonian perspective on double consciousness in 2005. So here we are in 2025. That's 20 years ago that I wrote this. That's why it's very interesting when you look at the time frames of what has really changed.
Nothing.
W.E.B. Du Bois wrote a book called Souls of Black Folks, 1903. And Souls of Black Folk, he was talking about double consciousness. So those people living in America, those Black Americans, are they American or are they Black? Where do you stand on that? So we have to look at the problems that occur from that. So as a psychiatrist, Frantz Fanon was focused on dealing with the mental changes or the mental problems that happen from that.
So this study that you did examines the historical parallel between the two work of W.E.B. Du Bois and Frantz Fanon. So Du Bois coined the term double consciousness, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so what did Du Bois wanted to explain with the term double consciousness?
Well, he was a preeminent sociologist, impacting many people throughout the world through his works. So he wrote the Souls of Black Folks in 1903, but he's written several texts after that. He studied the Philadelphia Negro, wrote a book called Dark Water. I mean, he's been very monumental for dealing with changes in society. He helped out with the Crisis magazine, which is a magazine started for the NAACP, that's the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. So he's been very involved in the movement for years, but as he's dealing with this from a sociological perspective, he's seeing the Black Americans struggle because of what the United States was doing to dismantle all their efforts. There was something called Reconstruction. During Reconstruction in the United States, there were more people in the governmental structure then than there are right now in 2025. How does that happen? Because systems are in place to ensure that you don't rise. So he's doing his work to say, really, where do you stand? Because it's really a striving of, do you want to just go be an American or the national consciousness of whatever country you're from, or do you deal with your identity? And so in my position, you deal with your identity, become better off mentally because the system can go backwards and target you. And that's what's happening in the United States right now, where people who could be immigrants coming from other countries, and they could have their correct passports, they could have their correct visas, but you don't look the same. So the national consciousness of that government is trying to get rid of people who don't look like them. That's a problem. So if you stood on your personal consciousness about your identity, who you are as a person, I think it's much more stronger because now in your community, you can fight against that kind of oppression coming towards you. So identity is key and critical. And if we don't deal with identity, then people become manipulated and they don't become who they are. They become someone else. And that's why this system of, the media control, people have people identifying with things other than themselves, and that's a problem. So W.E.B. Du Bois was addressing that as a sociologist.
Can you share some of the historical parallels between Du Bois and Frantz Fanon?
Well, interestingly, Du Bois was from the northern section of the United States, so more white in orientation. He went on down south to Fisk University for his education, undergraduate education, and then he went on to Harvard University to receive his doctorate degree in sociology. So in his travels of being a light-skinned person, going through these locations of identifying who he is, he started to understand the importance of being black, but he had some challenges with people who were pushing black identity, like Marcus Garvey. So over time, there was a fight, but a polemical situation between Marcus Garvey, who talked about Africa for Africans, and Du Bois, who just spoke about, again, let's have the talented 10th. That can create a problem because there's two different factions that are then developing from that kind of mindset. Okay, so with that parallel for Frantz Fanon, he grew up being just a Martinican, not African, not black. So in his environment, he was just a normal person wanting to be like the French people because they were colonized by the French. So he joined the military to fight for the French. But as he's in that experience, he's now seeing that there's a problem with him representing himself because people don't respect him, even though he could have the same level of credentials, but he's not being supported. So he's in the military, he then gets hurt, he goes to the medical school because he has now I guess like GI Bill in the United States. He has a funding that he can go to school. So he goes to school and he learns to be a psychiatrist, but as he's then going through the psychiatry, he's still dealing with and grappling with this issue of identity and who he is and who the people he's treating. So when he then gets a post to go to Algeria, he's now there working for the French, dealing with the Algerians who have their problems. But the French are looking at the Algerians as not people anyway, as not human anyway. So they were already being not just colonized, but being manipulated on a social level. So Fanon said, this is not right. So he ends up changing his views of not being on the French side, but understanding it from the Arab or the Muslim side and started to work with them. And that's why he becomes very important for the movement and revolution. So the Black Panthers in the United States, they use his book called The Wretched of the Earth as their handbook for revolution. That's the United States. He's from Martinique. He's over there in Algeria. Revolutions occur many places, but it's about how we identify with the missions because many of them are similar, but some people don't have the same information that others have. But as we now have looked at Fanon, when he was in Africa, he worked with Kwame Nkrumah, he worked with Patrice Lumumba. Wow. So from his little teeny island of Martinique, going to France, going to Algeria, and then having an impact on the independence movements there in Africa, he becomes a strong force. So the other books he wrote beyond Black Skin, White Mask were A Dying Colonialism toward an African Revolution, and his last book, like I said, that the Black Panthers used for their handbook was called A Wretched of the Earth.
And why did you decide to write this article?
Well, going through graduate school, I really appreciated the work of Frantz Fanon. I was introduced to him in a class called Psychopathology by a professor named Dr. Hope Hill. And so we used a book by Hussein Buhan called The Psychology of Oppression. Psychology of oppression. That means as people are being oppressed, their minds are being manipulated. Well, the way Fanon's breaking it down, it's not just the oppressed mind is manipulated, it's also the oppressor's mind is being manipulated. So he's really looking at the whole complex from a psychiatric perspective, but as a psychologist, that encouraged me to start to look at the ways that we can revitalize our minds or restructure our minds because we know that we have constant attacks. So I looked at him as a preeminent scientist, scholar, activist that I would love to model my world or my life around to follow what he has done.
I know that the article, it's geared more towards the African-American experience. And as I was reading it and trying to relate to the article, me being from the island here, or the Dominican Republic, I kind of saw like a resemblance as far as also having a double consciousness as far as not really having an identity. Because I can say, and we hear in many places, Dominicans saying, I'm Dominican, but the truth is, what is Dominican? So for me, trying to find that identity, I realized that with us as well, I don't just see that in the United States. I also see it here,
yes.
And I've seen it in different places as well. Do you think that what I'm seeing is correct or no?
Oh, absolutely. See, for me, I am an African living in America. We could say Black American, we could say just Black, but I'm an African living in America. You are an African living in Dominican Republic. Frantz Fanon was an African living in Martinique. That whole colonization process just ruined our connections, but we're all Africans. When people start denying that, that's when you start to see the flips in the mindset. And that's when you see the inferiority complexes being developed, because the inferiority complex means that I'm running from my Africanity. I'm running from my heritage. So I can really only speak from being an African living in America, but yes, this applies to many places you've gone. I've traveled the world and I've seen the identity issues. Actually, this paper that I wrote 20 years ago was actually a paper I did when I presented in France. So I presented it there in France because it was really focusing on Fanon's kind of background, because he's from Martinique, was colonized by the French, so I was using that environment to push this idea. But I'm also from America, where I actually work at an institution that W.E.B. Du Bois worked at twice, Clark Atlanta University. He was actually at Atlanta University in Georgia, and he left once and then came back. And I have done the same thing in my era of being an academician. So I looked at both of them as guides, and then the complex nature of both of them. I mean, nothing is simple and sweet. Like I said, why would Du Bois be arguing with Garvey if we're talking about revolution and change and building? Why would Frantz Fanon have a problem with Aimé Césaire when it's about, again, redirecting our minds? When I say he had a problem with Aimé Césaire, it's just about he wasn't caught up into the history. That history is past. I'm dealing with what we need now and what we need to be moving forward. So he thought that the history focused from the negritude movement, like that Césaire and Leopold Singer was pushing, was not forceful enough. So they both had their challenges during that time period. And so now here I am in the 2025 year analyzing and putting those things in perspective about how do we continue to make the change, because we seem to be in the same position no matter what country you go to. People have issues with identity.
Yes, and that creates a mental conflict. And then it's also mentioned in the article. So can you explain that mental conflict and why is it kind of like the double consciousness is used kind of like a survival technique?
Well, we can say survival technique, but it's a altered state of consciousness, because it should be a single consciousness. And that's what I try to emphasize in the article, that to be dual and double means you don't identify with anything. So the people in America are flying their American flag, rah, rah, rah. So those white Americans that like to do that, well, what is white? Is there a white country? Is there a white colony? Is there a white? It's just a name. Those are European people living in America that call themselves white. So Malcolm X says he traveled the world and he saw that, the white people in Europe, France, they're French. White people in Switzerland, Swiss. But the white people in America happen to be white. What is that? So now people want to identify with that whiteness as if that's something great and powerful, when the reality is it's manipulated our consciousness. So then white people think that they're superior. And when you now start going back in history, you start to see that they weren't the first. You think about the Greek history. Greek history was 640 to 322 BC. Yeah, BC. That's a small blip in history. Those pyramids were built 2,000 years before that. So when we think about history and us identifying with a people who are not really superior, it creates these conflicts. So you're trying to identify with them, but you then don't acknowledge and respect your own culture. Why? Because you don't know. That's why the component of miseducation is kind of a theme that I have within the article, because we've all been miseducated to think that someone else is better than you. Therefore, your inferiority complex develops. Therefore, you start to always see us in certain locations or jobs that are menial or trivial or not impactful. So you've given me the history here in Dominican Republic about, at one point, there was a black person that was selected as president, but they constructed things so he would not be president. So we have these societies that are creating scenarios where they don't want black people rising. I've traveled to Brazil, I've traveled to Dominica, I've traveled to other islands, Jamaica. I've traveled and I've seen people who don't know their culture and their history. I've been on the continent of Africa, I've been to Ghana, Morocco, I've been to Egypt, I've been to South Africa, I've been to Nigeria. I've seen some people don't know their own history. Why is that? The colonizer has miseducated people. I'm here in your land and I saw a big statue of Cristobal Colon, and one of the words is spelled wrong, chiseled in, spelled wrong. So this is where they say he found the West, I guess India, that's why they call us the West Indies. Mm-hmm. But for him to be now the person that all people look at as the discoverer of the world, and you've been telling that for 500 years, people are tired of that story. They've been miseducated, therefore they are unable to really know who they are. So we're now in our program, especially with Ubuntu Returnal, you got to return to the source. Return to the source to find your life. Other than that, you will continually be manipulated.
Okay. So how can we guard ourselves from the conflict of this manipulation of our mind?
Guard. Here we are in a cave right now. You got to go internally to find the answer. Most people talk about changes in society. They want reparations. Reparation means you want the institution that did bad to you to serve you now and to give you money for like restitution. That's reparations. Well, we need internal reparations. It starts here first. So you need to go to the cave, go inside, learn about yourself, and from that you then come out and blossom. So unless we do that and find the sources of our own personal information, no matter what country you're from, there's got to be a connection that keeps, for us, as we're dealing with this channel, you're dealing with people of African descent. Mm-hmm. You're dealing with their disconnect. So if we find the locations where everything begins, that's Africa, now you can look at, as you spiral away, everything is all connected to that source. So we must have internal reparations for that to work first.
Thank you. You mentioned that Bois came to a point where in his life where he couldn't tolerate the talent and intent that you mentioned a little while ago, nor the middle class that produced them. And Fanon, in Black Skin, White Mask, said that intellectual alienation
is a product of middle class society.
Yes, yes. Can you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, so middle class is in the middle, lower class, middle class, upper class. Middle class wants to be like the upper class. Middle class doesn't want to be like the lower class, so they become a buffer society. So they're the buffer to make sure that the people down the bottom don't want to come on up any higher, and the people up above, like the 1 or 2% that you saw in America, the 2024, 25 elections, a little 1, 2% controlled that government, now have a bill that's going to decimate the environment, the economy, the social welfare of people, education, all for that 1% that doesn't want anybody else coming up there. So the middle class becomes a buffer class because they think they've made it, therefore they're not trying to maybe learn more, ruffle any feathers, deal with the revolution. So Fanon called that a stagnant environment. So that's why he said it was middle class was produced intellectual alienation. For Du Bois, he, along with E. Franklin Frazier during those time periods of the 40s and 50s, E. Franklin Frazier wrote a book called The Black Bourgeoisie. And he wrote that to deal with the, again, the bourgeois that think they have it, with the secret societies, the Masons, and all these different groups that seem to be elevating like they're somebody in stature, but the reality is they're sometimes keeping the lower class down. So during his latter years in life, he, came to some revelations. No, I don't know if he and Garvey like shook hands, hugged, and got along, because people always like to tell the story. There was always enemies, like Martin and Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X. They weren't like enemies, but the way the media will put it out there like they are. So they just had different approaches. So Du Bois and Garvey, in my opinion, had different approaches. But for Du Bois, he passed away in 1963 in Africa, in Ghana, on the day of the March on Washington in the United States. So he wasn't even there for all those years that he was dealing with change and civil rights and fighting for black people. He happened to be in another country living when that was going on in the United States. So both he and Fanon, again, Fanon wasn't buried in Martinique, he was buried in Algeria. So as this conference is being held, they're now honoring him after 100 years of his birthday. I guess we'll find out how much tension may be there, because his family is respected, I'm sure, but his body is buried somewhere else. I don't know, I'm sure they have monuments to him there. I'm sure there's some pavilions and areas, but it'd be interesting to go find out, because I've never been to Martinique.
Do you think that France have recognized his work or recognized him as what he has shared with, especially with the African people and what he did? Do you think that they have ever recognized him?
Well, I don't know about France in particular, because, again, he was against the French. He was fighting for the Algerians. He was fighting for the independence movements. So whether we shouldn't even worry about them recognizing him. They don't have to. His books were published in French, so at least that was done. But for them to recognize him, that's a tricky situation, because he's fighting against the colonizer. He's fighting against the empire. So that's why I'm saying with Martinique, they're French colony, probably to the deep in the heart. Therefore, if you're fighting against our mother country, they probably wouldn't call it colonizer. You're fighting against the people who we respect. You then become the enemy in your own land. So I don't think we should worry about whether or not they have supported him. We just need to understand that he's recognized all over the world outside of his grounds. I mean, I've written several books. I'm more supported outside of the context and confines of where I'm at than where I work. So I don't think we need to worry about that.
When you mentioned that when history is read correctly, double consciousness is not needed. Why?
Well, if I respect your culture, you respect mine, and if we can now, in a symbiotic way, work things out, why there should be anything double? Just do what you do, let me do what I do. Why is it that African countries or former colonized places have struggles today? We're now in 2025, you have the French, Francophone countries saying, French, get out. We're tired of this double consciousness. Let us have our own. So in the Sahel states, from Mali, Burkina Faso, Chad, Niger, they're telling the French to get out because they no longer want that double consciousness. So when you say, I think your question was, why would that be a...
Why the double consciousness is not needed when you know your history correctly.
Right, so the fact that those Africans in their own country now say, we know and understand the value of ourselves, our community, our resources, our people, our culture, we no longer have to identify with anybody else. That's that single consciousness, because now what's happening in the Francophone countries, other people, other Africans in other parts of the world are rising up to say, we're standing with you. The colonizer doesn't want that to happen. So they will do whatever they can to dismantle anybody who's standing up for themselves. That's why, again, Black Panthers were ridiculed in the United States. They weren't a violent organization. They were just focusing on their community, but fighting against the oppressor. They knew the laws about carrying guns. You shooting at me, I'm gonna shoot at you. So they understood about the children needing food, so they have breakfast programs. So now the other governments have breakfast programs. You now have 2025, United States, they're canceling breakfast programs. So if we continually wait for the mother country, the enterprise, the colonizer to now come serve your needs,
it's not gonna happen.
No.
And we see it today. I mean, you wrote this article 20 years ago, and Fanon and Du Bois have been, we're here for so long, and it's been such a long time that, and still we are in the same place, and still we are here, both you and I, trying to take this information out to at least educate people, like I always say, so that we can create something different for ourselves. But we will need to be able to get there to that single-minded consciousness.
And I have a question for you. You took me to a museum, and in that museum there was some words. You took me along a ride by the beach, and there was a statue of the friar.
Yes.
What was that person's name?
Montesino.
So Montesino's words were there in the museum about how could you, as talking to his fellow white people, be so bad, atrocious against these people? How do you treat them like animals? So that was written in 1511. Mm-hmm. We are in 2025, and it has not changed.
It has not changed.
So we can't expect them to change. We have to change our behavior. As our behavior changes, they change. So any situation which A objectively exploits B is a situation of war. And in the situation of black people or people who have been attacked, we are at war. If you don't know that, that's why you continue to get exploited. And that comment about the war and the A and B really got that from Paulo Freire, wrote a book called The Pedagogy of the Oppressed. There's a way to teach oppressed people so they never fight back. There's a way to teach them so they don't know their history. So therefore, that 1-2% that's controlling everything has no worries about you. As you said here in the Dominican Republic, a lot of it's been privatized. If it's privatized, that means the people there don't own that. I've been in Colombia. There's a place called Buenaventura where the people rose up to say, look, we're not going to be privatized and exploited anymore, because there you have these private companies coming in, they control the ports, they control the environment, therefore they're not putting anything into the community. The people said, we're going to shut this down. They shut the port system down, and it caused nothing to come into Colombia. So things happen and change, but it's still a struggle. In Colombia, you have a black woman vice president. So you have changes coming in certain countries. Some of those people have been assassinated in the past, but you have change coming because people collectively are saying, we're tired of being exploited. We don't want the colonizers still doing these things, but miseducation, what occurs people, or has it where some people just don't know. They just go along with the program like a puppet, like a, just doing whatever the system says because they don't know otherwise. So miseducation has been tremendous.
Yes, we're going to touch a little bit about the miseducation and education. But first, I wanted to ask you, according to Frantz Fanon, he says that we don't know nothing of the cost of freedom. Why is this so, and what are the consequences of not knowing what the cost of freedom is?
Well, he himself did fight for the military, got hurt and left, but he was committing himself to fighting for freedom. There's the French Revolution, Russian Revolution, Chinese Revolution, all these revolutions. As Malcolm X said, the Negro Revolution. What's the Negro Revolution? The only revolution that wasn't violent. That means the Negro doesn't know the cost of his freedom. So if you fought for your freedom, you killed for your freedom, you cut for your freedom, you know the cost of freedom. But when you've been given to, when someone signs something saying you're free, like in the United States, the Emancipation Proclamation, 1863, signs, but what's going to happen beyond this 2025 with people wanting a dictator like this some guy called Trump? What's going to happen with this Project 2025 when they say, okay, we don't recognize those things anymore? So you don't know the cost of freedom. You can't sign your way to being free. You have to fight your way to be free. And so that's why I'm saying Fanon is probably emphasizing that, so I can speak of it from a African living in America perspective, but I'm sure it's the same all over. In Kenya, you had the Mau Mau. They fought for the freedom. They knew the cost of the freedom. They were attacked, but guess what? It caused changes in the environment. In the islands, you have many revolts. We're living up here, well, we're not living, but we're here up here in the caves right now. This is where the Maroons would go. Leave the city, escape from the plantation, come up to the caves, have their own environment. They knew the cost of freedom. So if you don't do that, then you'll just be a pawn in the game and continue to manipulate it.
Those that came before us did not educate us properly. And here we come with the education that you were talking about. regarding our enslaved history. So they did not teach us correctly. How does that affect us today?
Well,
how has that affect us today?
But when you say they, who's the they?
Our ancestors.
No.
Oh.
You say they did not teach us correctly. Who's the they?
Okay. Our family, our ancestors, our parents.
But some did. That's why we can't put it on them that they did not construct us to have a better way of living. They had at some points with slavery, you weren't allowed to read. You weren't allowed to write. You weren't allowed to have any books. That's what the colonizers did to make sure you would not be able to learn. Mm-hmm. So when you talk about people were studying. They were learning. They had to do it underground. You ever heard of a person named Harriet Tubman?
Yes.
Oh, she was learning. She did. Carter G. Woodson, well beyond Harriet Tubman, but wrote a book called The Miseducation of the Negro. He was doing it. So I'm saying there were people that were teaching us. This past, may his soul rest in peace, Jawanza Kunjufu is a economist in the United States that created his own publishing company called African American Images. He has written thorough texts and has promoted other people dealing with education. He's now deceased, gone, but we don't remember the name. So there are people that have been doing it. That's what I'm saying. The they is problematic because it's the people who are running from that information. The information is there. People are running from it. Why are they running from it? Because of the inferiority complex. I don't want to know about that black stuff. They'll have many conversations. I'm tired of that black stuff. What is black stuff? What is African stuff? We're just talking about history. But if you've been taught to negate your past, you're going to then look at it as something that's not valued. But I would say there have been many people who have been teaching us. We just have to have that internal reparation to go read their information.
But yes, that's correct. But however, we've had, and I can tell you from here, from the culture here, we haven't been taught. We just, heard about slavery and we just brush it off. And so that education is not there.
Okay, I understand. So the thing is, it's got to be a drive, though. You're not going to get it in the public school system. The public school system wants you to be a part of this system. They don't want you having any independent thought because that changes how the system runs. The system runs on exploitation. How can you be in a black nation and there's no black people in government, running businesses, running the economy, in multiple places that you travel throughout the world? How could that be? Because it's structured that way within the educational system. What I've learned doesn't mean I've only learned it from the academic side. Yes, I do have my education from a historically black college or university. Yes, I do teach at a historically black college or university. Yes, I do have that around me, but it's not as though it's just going to be gotten by osmosis. You have to go find the sources. You have to go have the drive to want to know more information. And once that's done, it should lead to what more information you want to know to build upon something. But most people are lazy. And it's bad this day and age with social media because you can push a button, get an answer, and you think you have it. Therefore, if you're not reading, how do you now know that Toussaint Louverture helped this island gain freedom? How do you not know that Dessalines and Daddy Boukman were also important for this island for getting freedom? But if it's been erased from history, you don't know.
What steps should we take towards a single-minded consciousness? And is education one of those steps?
I would probably say the first step is dealing with your personal desire and interest and motivation first. Because education, what is education? Education can be given to you, but you have to go out there and find and seek on your own. So I say the first step would be a personal decision to want to know. Second step could be potentially, if you call it education, but it's really just the access of information. Most people don't know how to, I don't know, go ask questions. You're asking me questions. You're learning on your own now. Mm-hmm. There's no book on you creating your Ubuntu Uterna website. There's no template for you creating the books that you've created, except for maybe reading other books. Oh yeah, you know what, I have an idea, but your books are now your independent way of looking at things. So as we then look at building on things, you have to have knowledge first. So if you don't have that self-knowledge, if you see it on the African temples, it says, man, know thyself. Greeks didn't say that. Africans said that. As you go into the temples, know thyself. So if you don't know yourself, then how can you even move forward? That's the first step. So again, with the education, if you call it education, it's just a matter of seeking knowledge. Most people don't know how to seek knowledge. I call myself a clue seeker. So I like to seek the information to kind of connect things. So as I then travel and go abroad, as I then go see other cultures, I'm then able to make better sense of things. So if people don't want to travel, people don't want to respect other cultures, they become ignorant and they get controlled by the way that the system wants you to think. And that's why when you got this situation in the United States with all these people saying these ICE raids, the immigration people coming with masks, like the old KKK with their white masks, coming to snatch people and taking them from the communities. You see examples in America where the Haitian community is coming together to fight off those white ICE agents coming, those slave raiders coming today. They're saying you're not going to take our people. So if you don't have that desire to focus on your community and support yourself, the system will eat you up. And so we have to be in a position where, as we're trying to create our Blueprint for Black Power conference, Blueprint for Black Power. Power. How do you get power? Power is the ability to define reality. As black psychologists, I've got great jegnas that I've followed, Dr. Wade Nobles, Dr. Naeem Akbar. They've traveled to Africa, have taken me to Africa, and I've seen us in action and what we can do. Power. Why don't we create our own soaps? Have our own water supplies, have our own whatever, have our own. And that's why those Francophone countries today are being attacked, because they want their own. And that means no longer is the Swiss going to just take the chocolate, make their own chocolate. Perhaps BP gas station won't get their own gas anymore. So British Petroleum is over there in Africa, taking the gas, taking the petroleum, making their gas. So we have to look at ways that we can get power by, again, in my opinion, self-knowledge, education of yourself, and then you can try to create a love for your people.
Yeah, thank you. Do you think that in this generation is found to repeat the same mistake that most of our ancestors did as far as not sharing the information or the correct information that we must be sharing out there with amongst each other?
Each generation has a responsibility to do something for the next generation. So if we don't have a connection to our past and our history, how do you then have a concept of generations? So with us as a people, we've been fractured. Our psyches are fractured. Our families are fractured. Our connection to that diaspora is fractured. So when that disconnect, it makes it very difficult to look at, well, what does it mean by the next generation? Because today, we have more resources and less access to power. During the Reconstruction era in the United States, black people organized, voted, had their own communities, and built. Black Wall Street, Tulsa, Oklahoma. You had Wilmington, North Carolina. I'm only speaking of the United States because of those places I know. You may know of places like here in Dominican Republic, primarily in San Domingo, where black people had run and had their own until things like gentrification developed. Things like other people coming in, controlling your resources and dictating how you're going to operate. So today, in this age, the media is more problematic because the media wasn't like it is in the past. So with the internet and social media, TikTok, Instagram, all these social media scenarios is much different than what let's say Nat Turner in South Carolina. He's never internet to say the revolution is going to happen August 31st. When the sun goes down, go. Sometimes they were planning around July 4th, Independence Day in the United States, because that's when white people will be celebrating. That's the time to attack. Well, they didn't have any Instagram to say do that back then. So the way the information is today and what people are getting, it can sometimes lead people down the wrong path because they're getting information from people on the internet that is maybe not reputable or giving false information. We're now in an age of artificial intelligence. I mean, for the generation to really get through things today, it's hard to say what is going to happen now because artificial intelligence could overrun things. And that could then alter the way that people are really progressing. And right now it's taking away jobs. What's this generation going to have as income? What can we do to get the next generation to think of new ways to have currency, or maybe have no currency? Or if there's going to be no currency, which is the plan, have no currency because robots going to be doing the work. Self-driving cars are there. What do you need people for? So when those things happen, this generation is struggling with that. And that's why it's a tough call to say, is it worse off or is it going to be better or what's happening? The point is that past generations should be passing on information for the new generation.
And to conclude our discussion and going back to double consciousness, the truth of the matter is, like you also mentioned, we must be thinking within ourselves as far as moving away from the double consciousness and going into a single consciousness and be able to identify with oneself. And with who do I identify with? Do I identify, for example, like here, it's very noticeable where you can have a very dark-skinned person and yet that person does not identify as an African.
Okay.
That person or that individual identify as a European. And then lo and behold, when they go and have, let's say, an experience where the European or the lighter-skinned person diminishes them or treats them in an oppressive way, that's a rude awakening for that person. Okay, so now I thought I was identifying as a European, and now I realize that I'm not, so okay, so what am I? And so identifying and going into that place of single consciousness is where we must be heading towards.
So Frantz Fanon said, or a comment that he made within his work, who am I? These are questions we should ask ourselves every day. Who am I? Am I really who I am? Am I all I ought to be? So in the midst of that, we know the system's crushing people's abilities to rise up, so you can't be all you want to be. I can use the example on your island of Hispaniola, where you have a people who fought for you to be free, and those people are now denigrated. I come to your island and I see the people who are doing the hard work, they're the Haitians. I come to your country and I see the people who are only the police officers, there seem to be the darker Dominicans. Your baseball players seem to be all the darker Dominicans. So I'm just saying that people have been pigeonholed to only be in a certain place. But on your media, you have more lighter-skinned people. And you have a challenge, I guess, with other countries now infiltrating, coming in, who are lighter. They're getting now those jobs, pushing down the lighter Dominicans out because there's now even lighter people. So I wrote a book called Pigment Power to deal with pigment politics. It exists everywhere. So the reason why America is so challenged right now because they had a so-called black president. It's like now you have a beer in the Dominican Republic called the Black Presidente. So Obama was a black president for 2 terms. That riled the feathers of those white eagles. We can't have this black person running the show. So you now have a whole reverse, like a pendulum. Now you have the white right, Tea Party, and all these other manifestations that have led up to a convicted criminal being elected as president. Whatever, you're not going to allow that black person to ever be president again. You're not going to have that individual that's dark in color running things. Therein lies a problem that will probably be another 500 years. The fact that we saw that wording in the museum and that particular friar's statue, he's being honored because he fought for the slaves, fought for the oppressed. but now we're 500 years and we're still in the same position. There's no reason, again, why on this island Haitians should be disrespected. But they are, because they fought for their freedom, knew the cost of their freedom, and the oppressor said, you will never allow that to happen again in this Western Hemisphere. So to not allow that Haitian spirit to rise again, you have to act like they're voodoo ghosts. They're scary people, savages, and now you go all over anywhere that's dealing with black people, you think all black people are savages because you've been kind of manipulated in your mind to think that only white and bright is right and black is bad, but black is where the revolution starts. And so those people who are opposed to that, either you dismantle them, cut them out of your lives, or I don't want to say convince them, because they have to want to do it on their own.
Yes.
You know, they have to internally want to respect other cultures, and most of the time that's not happening. But this will be a great start on the island of Hispaniola, because you have the largest island out of the Caribbean. It could be a stronghold. But a lot of the colonies, the playgrounds of these European powers, are still using your islands, from Antigua to Barbados. Even Barbados stood firm recently with their black woman president, stood firm for independence. Jamaica has their own challenges, being relieved from the British Commonwealth. So you have the playgrounds slowly, I would like to say, hopefully, being returned to a black, independent, single consciousness.
Well, TiMo, thank you so much again. We had a great conversation. Thank you so much for answering my questions, and for us to be able to bring this information so that people could understand, see it from the perspective of a double consciousness, and us, the importance of us gearing towards one single consciousness as far as finding our own identity and be able to identify with that identity. And so thank you so much again, TiMo, and continue to have a wonderful time here in the Dominican Republic. And I wish you all the best on our trip to Martinique to celebrate Frantz Fanon.
Yes.
So thank you.
Power to you, Ubuntu Returner.
Thank you.
You're welcome.